Hey everyone, and welcome to Drive Steady. In today's video, we'll compare the Audi A3 against the Mercedes A220, and we'll talk about things such as the engine, the transmission, how much horsepower, how much torque, what's the fuel efficiency, how many miles per gallon do you get, and also because these are on the smaller end of cars, we'll talk about the interior dimensions, how much headroom, shoulder room, legroom do you get, and we'll wrap it up with the pricing and warranty details. So if you're interested in these two cars, stick around and I'll tell you all about them. So before getting started, I wanted to give the obligatory thank you to everyone who watches our videos and also subscribes to our channel. So I've got my notes ready. Let's jump right into the comparison. The A3 and the A220 represent the entry-level models from a sedan perspective into Audi's and Mercedes' brand. The A3 debuted in 2013 to compete with the CLA at the time, the Mercedes CLA. And even though the A3 started becoming available in 2013 in the United States, it's considered the third generation, and there were two generations prior to that, which started in 1996. So the A3 was available around the world since 1996, but we just barely got it in 2013. It was fairly accepted by those looking for the more economical entry into the Audi brand, and also maybe for those people who didn't want a bigger car like the A3 or weren't willing to pay that extra for the extra size. They didn't really need it. So for that reason, the A3 was fairly accepted. As I mentioned earlier, Audi created the A3 to compete with the CLA at the time in 2013, and Mercedes really created this segment, this small entry-level sedan segment with the CLA, and it was kind of like this groundbreaking moment when the CLA came out. It was widely marketed as a entry-level, very economical. I believe the price was around $30,000 to $32,000 for a base level Mercedes, which was unheard of, because there were other Japanese cars where a similar price point was available on the more high-end cars, like for example on a Honda Accord or a Toyota Camry. If you went with the EXL or the fully loaded versions of those cars, they would come close to this $30,000 range. And some people started thinking, maybe I should buy a Mercedes for that much money. I think it was brilliant marketing on behalf of Mercedes to introduce the CLA, but nonetheless, the CLA is now a lot bigger. It's a lot more sophisticated than it was in its first generation. And now Mercedes has introduced this A220 to slot in as that entry-level car. In my opinion, it's a rather good-looking car. I've seen it in person at the LA Auto Show. There are some similarities between the A-Class and the CLA class. And Mercedes has had a go-around in this segment, so the A-Class should be a good car. So if you weren't familiar with these two cars, the A3 and the A220, that was kind of a brief history about where they came from and their origination. So now let's jump into the comparison and talk about the trim levels available in these two cars. In the Audi, you get the Premium and the Premium Plus. And the difference between these two is basically additional options, more features, and also maybe better leather and things like that. So it's mainly tied to functionality. And then Audi breaks it down even further, and you go into the Sport 40 and also the S-Line 45 trim. And the difference between these two, well, actually, let me start off with the similarities. They both have the same engine, okay? The difference between the two, there's two of them. Number one, the Sport 40 trim has less horsepower than the S-Line 45. I believe it's 184 and the S-Line 45 has about 220. I believe it's 218. Okay, so that's one difference. You get more horsepower. And then the second difference is in the Sportline 40 trim, it's a front wheel drive driven car, meaning when you accelerate, the front wheels are driving the motion of the vehicle. In the S-Line 45 trim, it's all-wheel drive driven, so all wheels. It's a four-wheel drive quattro system. So remember those two things if you're trying to decide between the Sport and the S-Line 45. Moving on to the Mercedes, it's a little simpler. They basically have two trims. It's the A220 and then the A220 4MATIC. And if you're curious on what 4MATIC means, it's basically synonymous with the Quattro system in that it represents a all-wheel drive. So A220 front-wheel drive, A220 4MATIC all-wheel drive. Okay, the engine output is the same no matter which one you choose, the four-wheel drive or the front-wheel drive. And no matter which trim you choose, you also get the same transmission in either trim. So the highlighted difference between the two options available for the Mercedes is front-wheel drive versus all-wheel drive. So now that we know which trim levels we're going with, let's pick one for each car and jump into the comparison. So picking the trim levels, in the Audi A3, we're going with the lowest trim, the Sport 40. And then in the Mercedes, it's the A220. So we're picking the most apples to apples comparison here. The base entry level, most economical entry to the sedan market for these two cars. Front wheel drive, similar transmission, similar engine output, okay? So speaking of engine output, now let's talk about the engine. The Audi A3 comes equipped with a turbocharged four-cylinder making 184 horsepower and 221 foot-pounds of torque. It's also mated to a 7-speed dual-clutch transmission. Now, I recently did a review on the Audi A3 comparing it to the 5 Series and the E350. Here's a link to it in the upper right-hand corner. But what I noticed is that Audi is using this 7-speed dual-clutch transmission in most of their newer cars now. Next, moving to the Mercedes, it also comes equipped with a 2-liter turbocharged 4-cylinder engine making 188 horsepower and 221 foot-pounds of torque. The Mercedes is also equipped with a 7-speed dual-clutch transmission. So if you were to compare the horsepower numbers for these two cars, the Mercedes comes in with 4 more horsepower than the Audi, 188 versus 184, and the torque comes in the same at 221. But one question you could be asking yourself is, why is the horsepower number so low? I mean, nowadays, under 200 horsepower is pretty low. Yes, it may be low, but these are fairly light cars, as we'll discuss here later in the comparison. And just as a reminder, they're entry level, so it's not all about the horsepower. Torque down low also makes a difference in day-to-day driving. But if you happen to be a horsepower type of person, BMW recently introduced the 2 Series Coupe, which even though it's called the 2 Series Grand Coupe, it's really a sedan in that it's got the middle seats and it can seat up to the same capacity as the A3 and the A220, and that has 228 horsepower and 258 pounds-feet of torque. So the information isn't readily available for the 2 Series sedan or the 2 Series Grand Coupe. That's why it's not in this comparison. Once it comes out later on, I'd be happy to provide another video update comparing the 3 of these cars later on. One other thing I wanted to talk about, going back to the Audi A3 and the Mercedes A220, and that's that they're both using double clutch transmissions. The reason why I wanted to talk about this and to also make you aware of it is that a double clutch transmission is different than a regular automatic transmission. It operates using 2 clutches. And the reason why that's important and the reason why I wanted to bring it up, because of 2 things. Number one, it's surprising to see more dual clutch or double clutch transmissions are being used in standard cars. Standard meaning non-sports cars. Typically, you see these in BMW M cars, AMG Mercedes cars. Porsche's double clutch transmission is a very well-known double clutch transmission, but now we're seeing them trickle down into the entry-level cars. And number 2, double clutch transmissions feel a little sportier. And the reason why I think they're doing that is because this is an entry level. It's going to attract a few more younger customers, and I believe the younger customers value that sportiness feeling as opposed to the regular automatic transmission. So that's the power, torque, and transmission discussion. Again, the Mercedes bests the Audi by a whopping 4 horsepower. All right, now let's talk about the acceleration in these two cars. The Audi A3 accelerates from 0 to 60 in 6.6 seconds, and the Mercedes does it in 7.1 seconds. So the Audi is half a second faster in the acceleration department versus the Mercedes, and I was kind of surprised as to why this is. And the reason why I was surprised is because these cars are fairly equal. It's definitely not the 4 horsepower making the Audi accelerate to 60 in half a second faster than the Mercedes. Both of them pretty much have the same horsepower. They both have double clutch transmissions. They're both front wheel drive driven. So I started thinking to myself, maybe it's because the double clutch transmission in the Audi shifts faster than the one in the Mercedes, and it's probably geared a little bit more aggressively. Or there's a little bit more tire on the Audi versus the A220. And going back to the acceleration here, you're probably thinking to yourself, wow, 6.6 seconds, 7.1 seconds. And referring back to that horsepower number, under 200 horsepower, you're saying to yourself, these are really slow accelerating cars. And I'm gonna combat that by saying that they actually have a pretty decent amount of low-end torque compared to the weight, which we'll talk about next. So considering that they have a good amount of down-load torque, I think they'll be acceptable in day-to-day driving when you're going from stoplight to stoplight or even merging onto a highway. You'll feel that initial thrust. Combining that with the double clutch transmission, I think it'll be acceptable. So it's not something to be worried about or be concerned about that these cars are really slow and whatnot. And the next topic, as I mentioned, is going to be comparing the weight of these two cars. The Audi comes in at 3,197 pounds and the Mercedes A220 comes in a little bit heavier at 3,285 pounds. So the Audi is the lighter car here. There's a difference of 88 pounds between the two in favor of the Audi. Considering that cars keep getting heavier and heavier, by 2020 standards, these cars are considered to be very lightweight. But then again, they are on the smaller end dimensionally, as you'll see later on in the video. So it's not really a surprise, but that just goes to show you the point I was making earlier, is that these cars are fairly light and that horsepower number doesn't have to be as ballooned as some other cars are to represent better acceleration or more eye-popping marketing numbers, so to speak. All right, next, let's talk about miles per gallon or fuel efficiency for these two cars. In the Audi, in the city, it's 27 miles per gallon, on the highway 36 for a combined average of 30 miles per gallon. The Audi has a fuel tank of 13.2. Keep that 13.2 number in mind. I'm going to talk about that here in a second. And the Mercedes A220, 24 in the city, 35 in the highway for a combined average of 28. And the Mercedes' fuel tank is 13.5 gallons. Looking at the numbers here, it's pretty apparent that the Audi bests the Mercedes. In the city, it's 3 miles per gallon better. On the highway, it's 1 mile per gallon better for a combined average of 2 miles per gallon better overall. The one thing to remember, as I mentioned, the fuel tank in the Mercedes is bigger, but in general, the Audi attains better fuel efficiency. Now, regarding fuel efficiency and your gas tank size, one thing I like to do to put it in perspective here is take the gas tank size and calculate how much it's going to cost you to fill up your gas tank, because I know everybody is so miles per gallon kind of not afraid but conscious for the environment and also for overall cost of ownership. So as I mentioned, the Audi has a 13.5 gallon fuel tank. I'm going to take that number and multiply it by the national average of fuel, which I believe is $2.58 today. And for the Audi, it comes out to $34.05. And in the Mercedes, I'm taking 13.5 gallons and I'm multiplying that by the same $2.58 and I get $34.83. So it's pretty close, as you can see, as far as cost to fill up your tank goes. If you look at the Audi and you combine the low price of filling up your tank along with a better fuel efficiency, you will save more money in the Audi as far as your fuel costs go throughout your ownership. But of course, miles per gallon has a lot to do with how you drive. So don't go around mashing your pedal and saying Drive Steady said that it's gonna get better gas mileage. So please don't do that, okay? Drive reasonably and you will get close to, if not better than some of these numbers that I'm advertising for you. Okay, next we're talking about interior dimensions. Remember I was talking about these cars being the entry level, they're more on the smaller end. So I've heard some people talk about concern or having concern on if they'll be able to fit, if they're larger individuals, etc., etc. So let's talk about these interior numbers really quickly. So we're comparing headroom, legroom, and shoulder room, both for the front and the rear. And here's the chart comparing the numbers for both of these cars in all of those categories. And one thing you'll notice once we look at these numbers here is that the Mercedes comes in better with respects to all categories except for rear legroom, where the Audi comes in about 1.5 inches bigger compared to the Mercedes. But that's something to keep in mind. The Mercedes best sit in basically all areas: front headroom, rear headroom, front legroom, front shoulder room, rear shoulder room. So basically, if you're a single person, you don't really carry around many people, and you want a larger space for you and maybe a friend that sits up in front with you, you're definitely gonna have more room in the Mercedes A220. So that's something to definitely keep in mind. Okay, the next thing we're going to compare is cargo room. Essentially, how much storage space do you have in these two cars? Now, in the Audi, it comes in at 12.3 cubic feet, and in the Mercedes A220, it comes in at 8.6 cubic feet. Now, the Audi has a lot more room, almost, well, close to double versus the Mercedes. And it's something to keep in mind because you like to carry things around, and this being a smaller car, you want to utilize your space as best as possible. Now, to put into perspective how much cargo room really translates into is, I like to use a carry-on bag. A standard airline carry-on bag takes up to 1.43 cubic feet of space. Now, if you take 1.43 cubic feet of space and you divide it by the cargo room available in these two cars, in the Audi you get 8.6 carry-on bags, and in the Mercedes it's 6 carry-on bags. So it's a full 2 carry-on bags more in the Audi compared to the Mercedes. So it's a pretty significant amount of extra room that you're gonna have in the Audi. And remember, the previous category we talked about was interior dimensions, and the Mercedes had more room on the interior, but it seems like the Audi has more room in the trunk. So it's a little bit of a balance you're gonna have to strike there. What's more important to you? Do you have a lot of stuff that you want to carry around, or do you prefer having the more room on the interior? All right, next we're talking about exterior dimensions. So how big are these cars really? So here's the chart comparing the length, width, height, and wheelbase. For those who don't know what wheelbase represents, it's the distance between the front and the rear tires. And generally, when the wheelbase is longer, it represents a more comfortable, smoother, more sturdy feeling ride. Okay, so looking at the numbers, here's the chart, and it's basically a landslide. The Mercedes is the bigger car with all respects, okay? It's longer, wider, taller, and the wheelbase is significantly longer compared to the Audi, 107.4 inches versus 103.8. So those are the exterior dimensions. You can clearly see that the Mercedes is the bigger car here. Okay, so the next thing we're gonna talk about is the price. Now, the A3 comes in at a base price of $34,295, which includes destination and handling. And the Mercedes A220 comes in at $33,495, again, which includes destination and handling. The difference between these two cars is a slim $800, so they're fairly similarly priced. So it's a decision that you'll have to make. All right, now the last thing I'm going to compare between these two cars are the colors, and this is more of a subjective extra credit type of category I like to do more at the end. All right, so in the Mercedes, you've got 9 colors. There's the standard black, white, gray, and silver, and you've got 1 red color. But one thing I noticed here is even though you've got 9 colors, they're not really a true 9 colors. For example, you've got standard flat colors and you've got metallic colors. 2 blacks, 1 flat standard color, 1 metallic color. 2 silvers, 1 metallic, 1 flat. So it's just kind of funny. It's not a true 9 different colors. One is just metallic and one is flat. Unfortunately, Audi is also doing the same thing as the Mercedes with the standard non-metallic and metallic colors. But they do have more interesting colors. I have to give that to them. They have a greenish blue called Cosmos Blue and also a red color. Now, if I had to choose the color that I like the most, irrespective of car, is the Cosmos Blue. I think it's the most interesting, me being an exterior color guy. I like interesting exterior colors, and I think the Cosmos Blue fits that bill, being a mixture of a blue and a green type of color. So I think that looks really cool. So if I had to pick a color, I would pick the Audi's Cosmos Blue, and I think it would look great on either one of these cars. So now we're at the end of the comparison. Let's tally up all the figures we just compared and then wrap up the video with some final thoughts. In the power and torque department, it's the Mercedes by a narrow margin. Acceleration, Audi. The weight, the Audi comes in lighter. Miles per gallon, remember the Audi is better here as well. Interior and exterior dimensions, the Mercedes is the bigger car, both inside and outside. The pricing, Mercedes is cheaper. In the warranty department, it's even 4 years, 50,000 miles for both cars. And the color, like I said, I like Cosmos Blue, which comes in the Audi. So the Audi takes that department. So that's the end of the comparison. Thank you for sticking around till the end. I know some of these can get a little long. But the Audi A3 and the Mercedes A220 represent a nice entry-level car at a fairly economical price when you compare them to other cars in the market. And I think they offer some appeal for younger individuals, actually for all individuals, looking for something to drive on a day-to-day basis, something to enter the Audi and Mercedes brands and eventually build up, or even to stay as something on a long-term basis. These cars are pretty solidly built. They offer a reasonable amount of power, a reasonable amount of space, and they're actually very good as far as fuel efficiency goes. In addition to that, you've got 4-year, 50,000 mile warranties. And as far as the decision goes, just looking at these categories, we compared 9 categories. It came up 4 for the Audi and 4 for the Mercedes, with 1 coming in tied, which was the warranty. So it's kind of a toss-up here. I know numbers don't necessarily dictate car purchases. They're actually highly subjective. They're based off of personal opinion. They're based off of you sitting in the car, driving it, and how you feel, how the car makes you feel. But at least this gives you an idea of some of the specifications to help you make a better decision. If you'd like to let us know which one you would choose, the Audi A3 or the Mercedes A220, please do so by leaving us a comment. We'd like to hear your thoughts. And that's pretty much the end of this video. Thanks for watching. Until next time, drive steady.